All right, let's get right into it. We're looking at a piece from the Wall Street Journal called Argentina Inflation Battle Jolts Confidence in Milei's Overhaul, written by Samantha Pearson and Silvina Friedlevsky. Now, this story is fascinating because it shows how a seemingly minor government dispute in Argentina is actually creating massive economic shockwaves that are being felt around the world. So let's dive in and unpack what's really going on. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll start with the big picture, Argentina's economic shock therapy. Then we'll get into the backstory with a history of mistrust around their economic numbers. After that, we'll hit the main event, the data controversy. Then we'll look at the real-world impact on markets, money, and people. And finally, we'll look forward and ask, what happens next?
Okay, first up, Argentina's economic shock therapy. You have to understand, President Javier Milei's government is trying a really radical plan to fix one of the world's worst inflation problems. And whether this whole thing works is really the heart of our story today. And, at first, this plan seemed to be working spectacularly. I mean, just look at this chart. Milei's policies took the annual inflation rate from a totally staggering 200% plus and slashed it all the way down to around 31% by late 2025. This wasn't just a good headline. It was the proof that his painful economic medicine was actually working. It was everything.
So what is this shock therapy we keep mentioning? Well, think of it like emergency surgery for an economy. It's a series of really fast, really drastic changes. We're talking deep cuts to government spending, getting rid of regulations, all designed to pull an economy out of a nosedive. It's definitely a high-risk, high-reward kind of strategy.
But here's the catch. For a plan like this to actually succeed, people, both investors and regular citizens, have to trust the official numbers. And that brings us to our next part, a long history of mistrust. To really get what's happening today, you have to understand why old ghosts are still haunting Argentina's economic data.
And right at the center of this whole mess is an agency called Indec. Now, this is Argentina's national statistics agency. Their job sounds simple, but it's absolutely critical. They're the official scorekeeper for the economy. They track the super important stuff, like inflation.
This history of doubt is so important to understanding what's going on now. Let's just walk through it. Back in 2007, the government fired key technical staff at Indec, which immediately raised red flags about political meddling. It got so bad that by 2013, the IMF, which is kind of like the world's economic referee, officially called out Argentina for its bad data. Then, in 2016, poverty numbers were just suspended. When they came back, they showed much higher poverty. So you can see how over years, this built up a deep, deep suspicion.
And all of that history sets the stage for today's story, the data controversy, where one single resignation managed to light a match and start a huge fire.
So here's what happened. The head of Indec, Marco Lavagna, quit. But why? Well, he resigned in protest because the government decided to delay an update to the shopping basket that's used to calculate inflation. His big fear was that this delay was a trick to make the inflation numbers look better than they actually were.
But what on earth is this shopping basket? It's just a way of talking about the list of common goods and services they track to see how prices are changing. The problem is, the current basket is based on a survey that's 20 years old. It doesn't properly account for modern costs, like how much people pay for utilities. The new proposed basket is much more up-to-date and gives a way more accurate picture of what people are actually buying today.
And the experts who follow this stuff for a living, they were not happy. One Argentine consulting firm, Equisanti, didn't mince words. They just came out and said, this is data manipulation. And that one quote really captures the fear here, that this wasn't just some boring technical delay, but a deliberate attempt to cook the books. So now, let's look at the fallout. What happens when that trust gets broken? That brings us to markets, money, and people.
Well, the reaction from the market was fast, and it was harsh. As you can see right here, Argentina's main stock index, the S&P Merval, plunged about 8% as soon as this news hit. If there's one thing investors hate, it's uncertainty, and this whole situation created a ton of it.
And the stakes here are not just local, they're global. There's a massive $20 billion aid package from the United States that is now at risk. You see, any hint that Argentina's economic data can't be trusted doesn't just put Milei's plan in danger, it threatens this huge lifeline of international support.
So, who actually gets hurt by all this? Well, the damage spreads far and wide. Investors, for one. They lose trust. And suddenly, Argentina looks like a much riskier place to put your money. Everyday citizens are at risk too, because their wages and pensions are often tied to that official inflation number. And of course, global partners like the US suddenly see their huge bet on Milei's reforms looking a lot shakier. Okay, so that brings us to the big question. What happens next? Let's talk about the key things you should watch for as this situation develops.
The question on everyone's mind is pretty simple. How is anyone supposed to know if they can trust the data from now on? And it turns out there's a pretty clear answer from the experts. Watch the gap. The most important signal will be the difference between the government's official inflation number and the numbers that private economists are calculating. If that gap starts getting wider, that's a huge red flag that something's wrong. All right, let's boil this whole complex story down to three main takeaways. First, the event. A fight over how to measure inflation kicked off a massive crisis of confidence. Second, the meaning. In a country like Argentina, with its painful history of manipulated data, trust is worth way more than any number. And third, the future. The success of this entire economic plan now rides on whether the government can get that trust back.
And that really leaves us all with one final, very big question to think about. For a government that's fighting so hard to build economic credibility, can it possibly afford to lose the trust of its own people and of the entire world?